Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad. Yang berbahagia Profesor Dr. Azizan Baharudin, Dr. Umar Faruq Abd-Allah, Imam Afroz Ali, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to IKIM. Once again, my name is Mazlina Ismail. On behalf of the organizer IKIM and Mbara, we're very glad to see all of you here and appreciate you taking the time and effort to join us in this event. We would also like to extend a warm welcome to all the people around the globe who are watching this event webcast through our IKIM Internet TV at www.tvikim.my website. Which camera? This one. You might want to put on smiles. Mana tahu kan? Ladies and gentlemen, in the spirit of knowledge and love, Alhamdulillah, Mbara and IKIM has come together in making today's event a reality. And so to begin our ceremony today, I would like to call upon Dr. Nik Usman Abdul Samad, Director of IKIM Media Center, to recite a dua.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma sallimna wa sallim dinana wa sallim tawhidana wa sallim ma'rifatana wa sallim qulubana wa sallim ajsadana wa sallim ikhwanana minal muslimin wal muslimat bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma ahsin aqibatana fi umuri kulliha wa ajirna min khizyi dunya wa azabil akhirah. O Allah, we seek from you of all good things which pertains to this day and the days in the hereafter. O Allah, in conjunction with the event today, a public lecture by Dr. Umar Faruq Abd-Allah on why religion matters, we seek your guidance and protection in making this event a successful one. Let this day be the most blessed day we ever saw, the most brilliant ideas we ever thought, the most excellent companions we ever met, and the best time of our existence. Inspire the members of this gathering with the spirit of peace and prosperity and friendship. Dispel anxiety and remove hatred from our hearts. Promote among us cooperation, sincerity, and loyalty in our work for the betterment of this country, Malaysia in particular, and the whole world in general. O Allah, help us with your grace and mercy. Guide us with your guidance. Open our minds and our hearts toward receiving and comprehending the best from the knowledge that you have given us. We seek refuge in you from knowledge which are of no benefit and from supplication which are not accepted. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma wa tafarruqana min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'asuma. Allahumma la tuhina fi ghaflah wa la ta'khuzna ala ghirah wa ja'al akhir kalamina 'inda intiha ajalina qawla la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.
Ameen. Thank you, Dr. Nik Usman, for dua, and may our ceremony start on a blissful note. Ameen. Ladies and gentlemen, we now cordially invite Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Professor Dr. Azizan Baharudin, Director General of IKIM, to deliver her welcoming speech.
Thank you, Hajah Maslina. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalam ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Rabbi syrli sadri wa yassirli amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Most respected Sheikh Umar, our invited speaker today, Imam Afroz, Brother Abbas, my colleagues from IKIM, brothers and sisters, invited guests, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And first of all, Alhamdulillah, with the grace of Allah, we are gathered here today to listen to our Sheikh, to our guests of honor, talk about a topic that is critically important, especially in the context of the physical and humanitarian crisis that our world is facing today. Friends, as you may know, this year marks 25 years of the establishment of IKIM, and to commemorate the event, to renew our resolve and our desire to fulfill the mandate of IKIM, we have decided to plan a series of programs this year, and to unite. The uniting theme for all these programs is religion and sustainability. And to kick off the programs, we had an international conference on religion and civilizational sustainability on the 20th and 21st of February, just a number of weeks ago. This was officiated by our Honorable Prime Minister. And today, what better topic that the Sheikh has chosen. We do not, inshallah, this is all God's plan. You know, before you speak about religion and its critical, religion being a critical factor in sustaining civilization, we should all know more deeply what religion is or is to begin with. And as you also know, one of the focus areas of IKIM's work is also to promote peace and harmony amongst the various races and religious communities in Malaysia. And today we are very proud and very happy to share with you that we opened this talk to people of all faiths and ethnicities. And I thank them for being here. Some of them are very close friends of IKIM, and we hope we can all go back and have stronger resolve to build a better Malaysia, inshallah. It is truly indeed our honor for IKIM to have this opportunity, Brother Abbas, to co-host the talk this morning, and we hope that you will forever think of us, inshallah, in the future. And also Imam Afra from Ghazali Center, Australia, think of us whenever you come to Malaysia. And this is not the first time Dr. Umar has visited IKIM. I remember vividly on the 4th of May last year, Sheikh, you were here, and you especially said to me, I'm not being gender biased here, I wish more ulama would say this out loud, that the women, because we were created out of Adam, do not ever forget that we are here to help the men, and let's create an empowerment of women in the Islamic community, which is unique to Islam, which will profit mankind in the truest sense of the word. As we know, Sheikh Umar is a renowned scholar of whom no introduction is needed, and is deeply rooted with the traditional learning of Islamic sciences as well as modern philosophy. And he shares the same inspiration with us at IKIM, which is to promote love amongst humanity, as we said just now. And as I was sharing with Sheikh, I think IKIM FM have been broadcasting Sheikh's words regarding love and compassion over our radio in the past weeks at a rate that I hope would have sunk into some of our hearts and souls. So, ladies and gentlemen, IKIM has also received consent from Sheikh to transcribe his lectures on living right with earth and balancing between reason and tradition. And we will be publishing this work by Sheikh in a monograph very soon. Inshallah, we hope this will be one of the strong or important points of his visit this time. We are also very thankful Dr. Umar is not only willing to deliver a public talk today, but also to launch a CD comprising his audio lectures that took place at several places in Kuala Lumpur in 2016. And one lecture in that CD is done this year over IKIM FM. So the effort taken by IKIM to compile these lectures of Dr. Umar and other scholars is to preserve the contents as well as to get them to reach greater audiences who may not be able to be present when Sheikh delivers his lectures. Last but not least, once again, we thank Dr. Umar, Faruq, Abd-Allah, Embara, and all parties involved in organizing this program. We hope that this will flourish in the future, this activity will flourish in the future, and will receive the barakah from Allah Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi, and welcome to IKIM once more and to our lecture this morning. Thank you.
Alaikum salam, and thank you, Dato'. Ladies and gentlemen, Alhamdulillah, IKIM is proud to have been blessed to host another program with Sheikh Dr. Umar Faruq here in this grand hall after his first talk last year. And we're delighted not only we have our fellow Malaysians attended the event today, but we see many international participants taking part as well. As Dr. Umar is a prominent scholar, many of you may have met, known or heard of Dr. Umar prior to this event and need no lengthy introduction. However, it is my pleasure to proudly share with you our honorable guest, Dr. Umar Faruq Abdullah's brief biography. Bismillah. Dr. Umar Faruq Abdullah is an American Muslim born in Columbus, Nebraska. He grew up in Athens, Georgia, where both of his parents taught at the University of Georgia. He did his undergraduate work at the University of Missouri with dual majors in history and English literature. In his last year there, he won a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship and entrance to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, to pursue a PhD program in English literature. Shortly after coming to Cornell, Dr. Abdullah read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which inspired him to embrace Islam. He subsequently altered his field of study and transferred to the University of Chicago, where he studied Arabic and Islamic studies and received his doctorate with honors for a dissertation on the origins of Islamic law, Malik's concept of amal in the light of Maliki legal theory. He taught at the universities of Windsor, Ontario, Temple, and Michigan. He then went to Spain to teach Arabic in Granada. 2 years later, he was appointed to the Department of Islamic Studies at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, where he taught Islamic studies and comparative religions for several years. During the time he spent in Jeddah, Dr. Abdullah was able to study with a number of traditional scholars. He then returned to the United States in 2000 under the auspices of the Nawawi Foundation, Chicago. He taught Islamic studies at Darul Qasim Institute, Chicago from 2012 to 2013. He is currently engaged in independent research, writing, and teaching activities with institutions across the United States, Europe, and Africa with a focus on Islamic theology. Dr. Umar inspires us to reconnect to our beautiful cultural traditions and to draw strength from our rich history. We make dua, may Allah SWT bless our gatherings and benefit so much from Dr. Umar's talk today, inshallah. Now, without further delay, it is my great honor to invite Dr. Umar Faruq Abdullah to the stage to deliver his lecture titled, Why Religion Matters.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Honorable Faruq, Mr. Professor Azizan, and all of the rest of the wonderful people, all the dignitaries that are here, I'm very happy to be back again. And I have been here now since the 1st of March, quite a long time, in Nusantara. And it's been a very beautiful experience for me, and I hope that these visits will continue bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We want to talk in the next hour about why religion matters. I would like to focus on 4 things. First of all, I would like to look at this topic from the standpoint of traditional Islamic law and civilization, in which religion not only mattered, but we could say that it mattered more than anything else. And it's important to stress here that we're talking about religion generically. We're not talking about religion just in terms of the community of Islam. Traditional Muslim scholars believe that human beings have to have religion. Doesn't matter whether it's Islam or another religion, they've got to have it. And if it goes, then the society will fail. So let's talk about that a little bit. And then I'd like to talk about the religious nature of human beings. And then I think we can talk about the rise of secularism in the 19th and 20th centuries, and some of the things that we've learned about that, particularly that refer to the religious nature of human beings. And then finally, I'd like to end by talking about the challenges that face religious communities in the age that we live in right now, in the global age. So we'll try to see if we can touch on these four topics, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. First of all, in the Islamic religion, there are 6 objectives that any healthy society must keep its eyes on, and it must preserve. And most of you know these really well. And these are the preservation of religion. Our traditional scholars believe that if religion is lost, humanity is lost. It's important, again, to emphasize that when they talked about that, they were talking about religion generically. As Muslims, of course, they have in mind the Islamic religion and the fact that it needs to be cultivated properly. It needs to be taught authentically. It needs to be practiced in the best way possible. But they are generic. In other words, Christians have to have Christianity, Jews have to have Judaism, Buddhists have to have Buddhism, Hindus have to have Hinduism also. And never was Islam under the illusion that it would eradicate these religions. It understood that they had to flourish also and not just survive. So this is a very important topic. And this is what we want to talk about in the first part of the speech. And the other 5 objectives, maqasid, as we would say in Arabic, are, as the majority of you surely know, the preservation of self, meaning that we have to be protected from harm, disease, danger. We have to be safe in our civilization. And in traditional Islamic law, terrorism was the most severely punished of all crimes. We call that hiraba. And the definition of hiraba includes the definition of domestic and international terrorism today. Anytime that you attack innocent populations that are not guilty of anything, this is the biggest crime of all. It is the most severely punished of all crimes in traditional Islamic law. And it is war against God and his messengers. The preservation of self. The human being has to be safe. We have to be healthy. We have to be able to leave our houses and come back without fear. And we have to have the preservation of intellect, al-aql, meaning, first and foremost, the preservation of the human being from insanity and from illusions and delusions. But it also, of course, includes things like education and the cultivation of the human mind, the cultivation of learning. And number 4, we could say children, although we would say traditionally the preservation of progeny and nasl. And sometimes we say nasab, sometimes we say the preservation of lineage, because it's very important for children to know who are their parents, who is my father, who is my mother. Many people, of course, are deprived of this gift, especially in our age. And in societies like mine, we can find in the present generation among every ethnic group so many people who don't know who their fathers or mothers were. And some of these are the very best of people. They're the very best of people. But there's always a pain that's there. That person looks like me, maybe my father looked like that. This woman looks like me, maybe my mother looked like that. Who was my mother? Who was my father? And people that don't have this, of course, they can be perfect human beings. And we must restore them. We must help them. We must not look down on them ever. But the preservation of the family is what is talked about here. And the family is the basic unit of civilization. One of the great miracles of these beautiful lands of Nusantara are the Wali Songo, the 9 saints of Java. And interestingly, they were family. They're all interrelated. And that's not a coincidence. It's also something significant. Perhaps it's irrelevant here, but I just wanted to mention that. And family is very important. The flourishing of the family. And then we could say the economy, which we call in Arabic mal, property. But it includes property. Some people who are not Muslims, but that I respect very highly as metaphysicians, Richard Weaver is the one I'm thinking of right here, Ideas Have Consequences, which is a very good book to read, Richard Weaver. He says that property, especially landed property, is the most basic of all metaphysical principles. Maybe you want to ask about that when we come to questions. I'm not sure I know what that means. But property is very important. And of course, also we mean by that economy, that you must be able to earn a livelihood. It should be in your means to do that. If you're honest and you're hardworking and you're skilled. Traditional Islamic societies, by the way, tend to be meritocracy. Some of them are more well known for that than others, like the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was extremely concerned with meritocracy. If you can do the job, it's yours. We don't care if you're a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. If you know your father and mother or you don't, or if your father and mother were great or not, can you do the job? You can have the job. But we need to be able to flourish economically. And of course, the poor need to have access to means by which they can not just survive, but by which they can lift themselves up. And then number 6, and this is one of those principles of the society that some scholars included and others didn't, but I feel it's imperative to include it, and that is honor. Honor. And when we talk about honor, we must mean the honor of every single human being. And in fact, in traditional Islamic societies, that definitely included also the honor of Jews and Christians, Magians, Buddhists, and Hindus, and others who lived among us. And if you insulted them in a traditional Islamic society by saying to them, let's say to a Jew or a Christian, Ya kafir, O disbeliever, you would be taken to court. And you could be severely punished because you insulted him. You insulted his honor. We're not allowed to do that. We had to have adab. We had to protect these communities, and we had to allow these communities to flourish among us. So these were regarded to be the 6 basic elements that every human society must protect. And this is very clear in traditional Islamic jurisprudence, that these are not just for us. They are not just unique to the Muslim experience. Religion, self, intellect, family, economy, and honor, but they are every human society. And our scholars will say in jurisprudence that you cannot afford to lose a single one. This they say very clearly, that if any of these is broken, the whole society will fall. The entire society will fall. The civilization will be lost. If we look at society today, I think we have to admit that in many societies, if I look at my own American society, we can see that many or all of these are either in danger or perhaps in some cases they're lost or they're on the verge of being lost. And that might pertain to certain parts of the society as opposed to others. But these are extremely important gauges by which we know our health or the lack of it. And therefore, a traditional Islamic jurist would say that you've got to always keep your eyes on these six, and you've got to make sure that they flourish. So we believe then that religion matters greatly, and of course it's not the only thing. Other things matter as well, but it is absolutely essential. One of the great things about traditional Islamic law and traditional Islamic society was its attitude towards other religious communities. And this was an attitude that meant that when these communities live as our neighbors, and especially if they live under our governance, they must be protected. They must be defended. And they may, for example, we cannot allow them to be attacked by a foreign enemy. We cannot allow them to be attacked by an internal enemy. And it's, I think, very much to the credit of traditional Islamic civilization that these communities had amazing autonomy in the Islamic world. So, for example, in the case of a Christian community living among Muslims, they had their own courts of law. Islamic law, the Sharia, never applied to the society as a whole. Some aspects of it do, such as those that pertain to security and pertain to foreign policy and things like that. But as regards other issues of what is forbidden and what is permissible, then the communities have their own ruling. They may be required to respect the sensitivities of Muslims, but they are free. They are amazingly free, and they tend to be autonomous. So Jews had their own courts of law. Christians had their own courts of law. And of course, are Christians all one denomination? No, neither are we. And so therefore, each denomination had its own courts of law. And for this reason, in traditional Islamic society, the Christians developed canon law very, very early. Those of you who know about Western Christianity, the Catholic Church in particular, you probably know about the development of canon law in the history of Europe. But canon law developed among Christians much, much earlier than that among us. And this is because of the fact that they had to have their own law. They had to be able to judge their community by their own marriage laws, their own divorce laws, and so forth. And every community had its own. The Nestorians, the Jacobites, the Malachites, the Armenians, and so forth. That's an amazing thing. The Jews had their own rabbinic court. Today, if we say the word Talmud, which is that book of the rabbis that sort of includes everything, the law, the commentary on the law, doesn't include everything, but the practical aspects of the religion. And when we say the word Talmud, a Jew in the West will understand the Babylonian Talmud, as opposed to the Jerusalem Talmud, because there are two. Why did the Babylonian Talmud become the default Talmud of the Jewish world? Because of the Abbasids. Because the Abbasids who were ruling at that time were based where? In Babylon. They were based in Baghdad, which is not far from Babylon. And the rabbinate that they empowered, they were the rabbinate of Iraq. And so therefore their Babylonian Talmud will become the world Talmud. 90% of Jewry in early Islamic history lives in the Islamic world, protected in the Islamic world. Whereas the Jerusalem Talmud, it lost out because of the fact the Umayyads lost out. Had the Umayyads continued to rule in Damascus, then the word Talmud today would mean Jerusalem Talmud, which was the Palestinian Talmud. Now these are not extremely important details, but they serve as indications of our attitudes towards other communities. And when Islam spread among the Magians and the Parsis, among the Buddhists in Afghanistan and Central Asia, among the Hindus, and of course the Hindus in India and the Hindus in Nusantara in particular, here you had very special type of Shivite Hinduism, and also Buddhism as well. Some of the greatest expressions of Buddhist civilization are in Java, but here also the attitude towards them was similar to the attitude towards the Jews and the Christians. And here, I think the notion of tolerance that Muslims had is something that is instructive for us today. And that is that Muslims believed that they were correct. Every religious community believes that about itself. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a religious community. A Shivite believes that that's it. I've met some who tell me that you don't understand. We have an answer for everything. I said, well, let's sit down and talk about it. Maybe we have some answers too. But religious communities always believe that they've got the answer. Otherwise, they wouldn't be that religious community. And we allowed them to maintain that position. And we gave them autonomy. And we protected them, and we allowed them to flourish under our very eyes. And for this reason, usually wherever Islam went, the other religious communities will flourish. They will come to life, if they were not already flourishing. And if they were flourishing, they will flourish more. The Orthodox Church, which will be essentially under Ottoman tutelage after the conquest of Constantinople, the Ottoman Church, the Orthodox Church, develops an extremely positive relationship. So we like to get together in the Sultan's palace, all the different religious communities, and have them debate with each other. And they were supposed to do that with etiquette, although often they were not polite. Often the Christians might say things, for example, that were very offensive to Muslims. But because they're there in that particular context, they have to say that, well, we don't think this is polite, we don't like what you said, but you have to be able to say it. And we had good books about comparative religion, some of the best being Ash-Shahrastani, Al-Milal wal-Nihal, which is an incredible study. And then we have also the works of so many other great scholars. Ibn Taymiyyah himself, in his work on Christianity, that's a really competent study that he did. A Jesuit friend of mine studied it at the University of Chicago, and he was very impressed by what was there and the whole tradition of the inter-Christian Muslim dialogue that had gone on. The important thing also is that Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, they were never required to take Islam 101. So many of them didn't know what we believe. And that did not bother us. That was not seen by our civilization as a major failure. There's a very good book that you might like to have, which is called The Arts of Intimacy. And that book is written by Jennifer Dodds, D-O-D-D-S, and Maria Menocal, M-O-N-O-C-A-L, and my friend Abigail Balbali, B-L-B-A-L-B-A-B, Balbali, B-A-L-E, Balbali. And that book is published by Harvard or Yale, don't remember right now, came out in 2009. It won an award for the best book of the year. And it is a study of the interfaith culture of Toledo, the great city of Toledo in Spain, which had in it a very large Jewish community, a very large Christian community, and a very large Muslim community. And the book is academic, it's not romantic, and it's based primarily on art and architecture and poetry and other things. And they're very clear that if we were to say that the Jews and Christians and Muslims loved each other, that's probably not true. Each of them was very proud of itself. And each of them had good things and bad things to say about their neighbors, whether they were Jews or Christians or Muslims. So the idea that we all loved each other and we woke up in the morning with smiles on our faces, that may not be true, although sometimes it was true. But they lived in harmony with each other, and they competed with each other in art, in architecture, in poetry, in the different types of arts that they did in their society. So, and in fact, they influenced others on the outside. So I think this is an important lesson, because we have to have a civilization in which we acknowledge the differences of people, and we acknowledge that you're not going to be able to change them. And therefore, allow them to be your neighbor and allow them to flourish. And don't be jealous of them when they do that. And the Jews flourished under the Muslims of Spain as never before. Maybe some Jews would even say, and never afterward. They attained a height of civilization that is very great. And often in other places in the Muslim world, they did that as well. And the same can be said about the Christians. And the Christians in Muslim Spain and Portugal, most of them were Catholics. But not all of them, but most of them were Catholics. And in every major city, Cordoba, Toledo, Malaga, Granada, Seville, many others, you had a Catholic bishop who was honored and who had power, who has his own canon law in his own courts, and he can go to Rome anytime he wants, and he can come back. He'll go to Rome wearing these incredible, beautiful Andalusian garments that are Andalusian Christian, not Andalusian Muslims. So this is the first point that I wanted to make, that we believe religion is important. And honestly, in traditional Islamic law, we allowed religions to flourish in our midst, and we believed that that was good. We did not try to undercut them. Again, there's another great story here, which is the story of Islam in China. Islam has been in China for 1,400 years, if not more. It's been there from the time of the early companions, or even from the Prophet's time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But one of the great achievements of Islam in China was that of great scholars like Liu Ji and Wan Daiju, forgive me for the bad pronunciation. But they wrote about Islam in Chinese, in classical Chinese, for the benefit of whom? The Muslims. Because the Muslims of China, many of them were generals in the army. The army was overwhelmingly Muslim in China. Many of them were ministers of state, ministers of finance. When Marco Polo went to China, the minister of finance was a famous Muslim scholar. And a lot of times they were trained in Arabic, which they loved, and they were trained in Persian. In the case of the Chinese Muslims, this baffled me actually when I first went to China in the year 2002, was to see how the Hui loved the Persian language. And I couldn't understand that until I learned later on that Genghis Khan brought to China over 1 million. Is, of course, one of the great, we could say, sacred languages of Islam. It's such a beautiful language. But so they have Arabic and they have Persian, but often they found, especially as they became schooled in the classics of China, that they couldn't relate to the Arabic or the Persian the way they could relate to Chinese, as a different cognitive world, a different worldview. And so these great scholars like Wan Daiju and Liu Ji, who I think are the greatest of the masters, they begin to explain Islam to the Chinese Muslims in Chinese terms. This is what they did. And I wrote a paper about that called Seek Knowledge in China, Thinking Beyond the Abrahamic Box. And you can look at that if you like. But, I talk a lot about Wan Daiju and Liu Ji. But when they wrote these books for the Muslims of China, many of whom are ministers of state, then sometimes the Pure Land Buddhists, the Neo-Confucianists, and the Taoists would read over their shoulders. In fact, they get their own copies. And then they will come to these saints and they'll ask them questions. It's an incredible aspect of history, because also what they wanted to show was the compatibility between an Islamic, Abrahamic worldview and between that of Pure Land Buddhism, which was the dominant school of China at that time, and Neo-Confucianism and Taoism. And this is an amazing dialogue. Of course, you have a parallel to that in the great saints of Java. And this is one of the greatest things to be said about them. You know, these great Sunans, these great saints, is that they understood the greatness of Javanese culture. They did not look down on the Buddhist tradition there or the Hindu tradition there. And in fact, they tried to find in those traditions, they knew how those people worshiped God. And the traditions of Java are very interesting because they're quite unique in some regard. But they understood that uniqueness and they tried to articulate what they believed in terms that respected and were also reasonable, intelligible in the eyes of those traditions. So this is part of our past also. And I talked about it way too long. This was supposed to be 15 minutes, and I shouldn't have looked at my watch. Human beings are very religious. This is the second point. The 19th century and the 20th century were extremely secular centuries, the 20th in particular. The 19th century builds up to that. And the rise of secularism in the West is an extremely important historical topic. It's one that I think everyone needs to pay attention to. We know that in the West, they established the science of Orientalism. That goes back hundreds of years. And of course, they wanted to study about us. They wanted to study about the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jains, and others. Orientalism has very good aspects to it, and it has some others that are maybe not so good. Not just regarding Islam, but also regarding Hinduism and Buddhism and other traditions. They looked at it from an often very narrow point of view. But as one great scholar has said, we have to have Occidentalism too. And maybe Occidentalism, which is the study of the West, is more important for us than Orientalism is or was. We do need to know, what did the West go through? How did it get to where it is now? And how do we evaluate that legacy? But in the course of these last 5 centuries, the West has undergone fundamental change. None of you are hearing that for the first time. You know about that for a long time. This is the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. It happened in, 1517. That's when Martin Luther nailed his theses, his protests about papal religion, on the door of the church in Worms in Germany, a city called Worms. And we don't have time to go into that, but the West will then go through a number of changes. One of the most important is in the 18th century, which we can call they call it often the disenchanting of nature. That they begin this process of looking at the natural world as if there were nothing out there but what you can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell with your senses. Therefore, there's really no witchcraft. There's really no sorcery. There are really no demons. There are no spirits. Whether the spirits are good or bad, that's all superstition. There are no, also then, what about angels? What about God himself? So this Entzauberung, as it was called in German, which means removing the magic, this is a very important part of Western intellectual development, especially in the 18th century. And in fact, Carl Jung, who is one of the great psychologists of modern Europe, of the 20th century in particular, Jung will even say that all of my patients who came to me with psychosis all suffered from having lost that worldview that they had before, when they believed that the world out there was populated with unseen reality. And when they believed that when the thunder claps, as we often hear in this beautiful land. I love the thunder and the lightning and the rain, so it makes me very happy to hear that here. But he said that they had to believe that was the voice of God. We Muslims don't say it was the voice of God. We will say it's the voice of the angels who are glorifying God. But he said psychologically, human beings need that. They need that to be sane. So here, Jung is one of those voices of the 19th and 20th century who is beginning to say that we are quite religious at heart. In fact, Jung has the notion of the collective unconscious, which is a topic that is complex and perhaps problematic in some ways. But then you go into the 19th century, which is the age of materialism. Before that, you have the mechanical world, because that world of spirits and of angels that was depopulated in the course of the 18th century, it becomes a mechanical world. One of the common religious beliefs at that time is the school of deism, D-E-I-S-M. And deism has there's a lot of good we can say about it. But then that's not the full story, and in my opinion. And the God of deism is often referred to as God as absentee landlord. That he sets up the world like a clock. This is the metaphor they love. That's the age of the clock, the age of the watch. And then he just walks off and leaves it and does other things. This is very much a deistic worldview, a mechanical worldview. And then that mechanical worldview will feed in the 19th century into a materialistic worldview. And the 19th century is in many ways the first really materialistic century in history. Of course, not everybody was that way, but the materialism there is very strong. And then you have materialist ideologies that come out of that, like dialectical materialism under Karl Marx and Engels and so forth. And in the 19th century, you have people, the Marxists being among those, and some other anarchistic voices as well, and also scientists as well. Not all of them, because many of the scientists remain very religious at heart. But there is then the belief that religion is going to leave us sooner or later. It's on the way out. When we come into the 20th century, this was the expectation of many people in the 20th century, especially in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, into the 1960s, when perhaps that begins to change. And here it was often believed, I remember hearing that. I have gray hair, so I know more about the 20th century than a lot of you. Not everybody, but a lot of you. But I remember being told that by the end of this century, there would be no religion. That would be gone. Of course, in the 20th century, you have the phenomenon of what was called secular alternatives to religion. And these also taught us, in terms of anthropology and sociology and politics, that human beings are very religious at nature. So if you want them to buy into a secular ideology, you've got to give it a religious turn. You've got to make it, quote unquote, religious. The Nazis in Germany did that with great cleverness, maybe diabolical cleverness. Those of you who know about Christians, you know that the cross occupies a very powerful, powerful place in their imagination. So maybe you could imagine what the swastika will mean when it's a cross that has been changed that way. Of course, it's taken from India, it's taken from the tradition of the Jains and the Hindus and others, but there the swastika meant good luck and life and other beautiful things. It also faced the other direction. But Hitler will use that as a powerful symbol, which is a religious symbol, although secular, although nationalist. And they will use colors, they will use lights, they will use music, they will use art, they will use propaganda. And they create, so fascism in Germany becomes a secular alternative to religion. Consciously. Where did they get that from? Well, they certainly take a lot from Joseph Stalin. Because Joseph Stalin, who, as I'm sure almost everybody here knows, was the ruler of the Soviet Union for a very long time, after the death of Lenin in the late 20s, up until his death in the 1950s. Joseph Stalin understood that in order for communism to get the hearts of the people and the youth, that it would have to be also a secular alternative to religion. So it would cast itself in a religious garb. And this would be the cult of Stalin. It's also the cult of Lenin. So the body of Lenin will be embalmed. It will be put in this mausoleum that is there in the Kremlin. People will be filing by it constantly to look at it. I mean, what is the place of that in dialectical materialism? What's the big deal about Lenin and his body? And it will be preserved as if it had just died. And morticians were always working on his body, you know, almost on a monthly basis, just to make sure that it doesn't show any signs of decay. Then the cult of our father Stalin, who was actually referred to in the Soviet Union in the same way that a Christian would say, "Our Father who art in heaven," in the Lord's Prayer. He is our Father Stalin, and his picture will be everywhere. And the cult of Stalin will become absolutely essential to the Soviet Union. So again, this is a secular alternative. And then psychologists, social psychologists, anthropologists, and others, they began to see that there are many of these. What about professional sports? What about the World Cup of Soccer, which I'm sure everybody here likes to watch, and I like to watch it too. It's the best soccer in the world. But nevertheless, isn't there a religious fervor to that? And we see this in many other types of sports. We see it sometimes in music. We see it in fans. You know, the word fan, which we developed in the 20th century, that word comes from what root? Fanatic. And the word fanatic in the English language comes from idolatry. Because in Latin, fans, F-A-N-S, is the word used for the temple of the idol. So if Jupiter has a temple, or if Juno has a temple, or Mars, or some other god, that will be called fans. That's the temple. And the person who serves it is called what? Fanaticus, or fanatica. They're called a fanatic man or woman. And our whole notion in the English language of what a fanatic is taken from the way that the devotees of these temples of Mars and Juno and others often behave. This was everything. There's nothing else. But we in the 20th century will apply that to fans. We have baseball fans in the United States, football fans. Got them all over the world, don't we? And then we have fans, you know, in other things as well. And then you have rock stars, you know, who have their following, which is often fanatic as well. So in the 20th century, we began to see that human beings have an essentially religious nature. And therefore, a number of thinkers began to say in the 20th century that maybe we were wrong here, that human beings are fundamentally religious. They're very religious in nature, and they will all worship something. Either they worship God, or they worship money, or they worship the nation in nationalism, or they worship women or men, or they worship cars. But human beings attach in a way that is more than we can explain in purely material terms. And in the 20th century also, we have some of the best studies of religion that had ever been done up to that time, maybe even to this time. One of the great studies is the study of a German priest, who's a Catholic priest, and a very serious anthropologist. He's a man I hold in great esteem. His name was Wilhelm Schmidt. Wilhelm is the German for William. Wilhelm, and Schmidt is the German for Smith. I don't know if that helps you, but Wilhelm Schmidt is the name. W-I-L-H-E-L-M, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T, Schmidt. And he wrote a great work in German on the origin of the belief in God. The origin of the idea of God. That's actually what the title is. This is primarily a study of what some people would call primitive religion. And he usually avoids that word. He will use a German word, which is die kleine Völker. He will call them the little people. And in English, we often do that too, by referring to primitive religions not as primitive, but as micro-religions, little religions. And our definition of a quote-unquote primitive religion is exactly that a primitive religion is a religion that is worshipped by a kinship group who are, you know, socially organized by kinship. They don't have a political system. And they don't have other tribes. They are all the same tribe. They're all kinship. So you find people like this, not so many today as before, but you find people like this throughout the world. Most people, even most tribal people, are not going to be primitive. They will be many tribes living in alliance with each other. If we look at the First Nations of my land, of America, North and South, most of them are not so-called primitive people. They, like the Iroquois Nation, the Cherokee Nation, the Hurons, the Lakota, and so forth. These are complex confederations of tribes. And their religions will be different. And this is something that was noticed, is that religion changes. But primitive people, the so-called micro-religions, Schmidt establishes pretty much beyond doubt that all of them share the belief in one God. And interestingly, the ancient Greeks used to have a saying, one tribe, one God. That wherever they found one tribe in isolation, they would find that they have one God, not many gods. And they're not animists either. This is very important because part of the Darwinian social theory of the 19th century was that religion also evolves from very simple, primitive origins, which were animistic, meaning the belief in jinn, basically, and jinn who occupy rivers, jinn who occupy trees. There are jinn who do that, by the way. And here in Nusantara, as our beloved Sidi Abdul Hakim Winter said, you have to always remember when you talk about places like Java, and probably that's true of all of Nusantara, I can't say, but he said that they're not just inhabited by human beings. There are others out there too, which you may not want to know about, you know. But so there was this idea that religion begins animistically, and then it evolves into the religion of gods and so forth. And this was basically shown to be totally untrue, totally unfounded. That micro-religion always has very clearly the concept of the one God. And every people on earth, maybe there are exceptions, but they're very few if they are, they all have words for speaking about God, not in terms of a particular deity, but in terms of the one who has no beginning, who has no end, who is unlike others, who is infinite. And this is a beautiful study. And and I think we're going to have to end here, but let's jump forward then to the last topic that I wanted to discuss, and that is that how do religions change? And what is the motor at work there? And what I believe, based on the great thinkers that I am most influenced by, especially people like Arnold Toynbee, who has had a huge influence on me in my life, is that, first of all, for Toynbee, who is a great thinker, really should be studied carefully. But for Toynbee, religion is at the core of human civilization. You cannot talk about human civilization without talking about it. And Toynbee is very influenced by Wilhelm Schmidt and by others. But one of the things that Toynbee believes is that whenever people mix, there will be religious crisis. Because their tribal religions, which worked perfectly for them as an isolated people, who often have a special relationship to God as that people. Many people in the world, like the Inuit of North America, whom we call the Eskimos, they don't like to be called that, they like to be called Inuit. But the Inuit, their language means the people. Inuit means we are the human beings. In their environment, which is that environment of the Arctic Circle, especially in the old days when it was this extremely cold, extremely difficult environment. It's unfortunately not that way now. This last winter, the average temperatures of the North Pole were 50 degrees hotter than they're supposed to be. That's not good, brothers and sisters. And it's not good for the Inuit either. And it's not good for the polar bear. The polar bear is dying off. You know, it needs to have the ice. But the Inuits, these beautiful people, extremely civilized people, if you see the way the art they had, the weapons they used to hunt, the way they built, the clothes they made, these were extremely sophisticated people. In Chicago, we have the Museum of Natural History, which has one of the best displays of Eskimo or Inuit culture that I've ever seen. These were extremely sophisticated people. You have to call them civilized. You do, even though they didn't have cities. But, you know, these people lived in complete isolation from others. They rarely saw anyone who was not an Inuit. And so therefore, they were the human beings. And they, as human beings, had a special relationship to God, and they believed in one God. Often these people, however, will be very similar to the Arabs in Jahiliyyah. They're not identical to them in any way, but they're similar because, as you know, as most of you know, especially the Muslims know, the Arabs in pre-Islamic Arabia believed in the one God, the Creator God, Allah, who is, that's the same word we use in Hebrew, the same word we use in Aramaic and other North Semitic languages. In Hebrew, it's Ha-Eloh, Elohim, and in Aramaic, it's Allah. And Jesus Christ, who probably spoke Aramaic, when he said God, he would say Allah. It's almost like Allah. He would say Allah. And Allah means he who is worshipped. Just like the English word God, which is thousands of years old, means he who is supplicated in prayer. Very close to the word Allah. But they also have this belief in God. But many of these people, like the pre-Islamic Arabs, they believe in Allah. They believe in the Creator. But they also associate with him other things. Although in the case of micro people, they're not usually deities. They're usually ancestors. And sometimes heroes, great warriors, or great fighters. And there are other complexities there. But the important thing, and I know that we should end here. I've taken an hour. And I'd like you to have time to ask your excellent questions. But one of the things that we see, Toynbee says, is that when you mix people, you're going to have religious crisis because they may not be able to explain the universe anymore in the way they did before. The Inuit have no problem explaining everything when they're the only human beings. But once you have white men coming there with powerful weapons and with a different religion and also even telling them your religion is wrong, then there's going to be a crisis. And even if it weren't like that, if there were other people that were there, then there will be a crisis. That how do we explain ourselves? In fact, the rise of Mahayana Buddhism, the rise of Vedanta, Hinduism, and the rise of Christianity, and the cult of Mithra, and so forth. Toynbee would say, you can't understand this if you don't understand it in the context of this world that was post-Alexander the Great. And Toynbee explains Mahayana Buddhism, and of course we know that we have Indic religion in India. You have the religion of the Vedas. And then you have Hinduism. It's not the same thing. There is a big change there. There is continuity, yes. But to come to Vedanta, which is the end of the Vedas, and this other tradition, something else was happening. Toynbee believes that it has to do with these profound changes that took place in the world after Alexander the Great. We don't necessarily have to agree with him on that, but this is the way that he thinks. And certainly in Rome, this is applicable also. In Greece, it was also applicable. In the days of Jesus Christ, over 1,700 years ago, Rome was empire. It had been republic, now it's empire. It's ruling the greater part of the Western world. And all the nations there have come together in Rome. All of them. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, everything is there. And the old Latin religion, which was, of course, the cult of Jupiter and of Juno, which was their ancestral religion, that religion was almost finished. The temple of Jupiter was, of course, honored because it's part of their Latin tradition. The cult of Juno was honored as part of their tradition. Mars was important because that's the Roman army. But almost no one went to the temple. Almost one. And that's because it didn't speak to them anymore. There are too many people here who don't know Jupiter, who don't know Juno, who don't have that tradition, and who don't belong to those classes either, because the Latins had a special relationship with their gods, which the non-Latins, who are now the majority of the population, didn't have. And so therefore you have immense religious turmoil. And out of this you have new religious developments. Among the most important of these is Stoicism. Stoicism, which you probably know of as a philosophy. And Stoicism was a philosophy, but it was also a religion that believed in the one God, and it believed in the unity of human beings. And it had a particular attitude about other religions that we might say is eclectic. In other words, it tends to explain all those religions as fitting under this rubric. And really, Stoicism will almost become the religion of the Roman Empire. Because they've got to have something that makes sense of this empire that has so many different people. Black people, white people, Asian people, different gods, different religions. So Stoicism was meant to do that. You have then also Neoplatonism, which was based in Alexandria in Egypt, which is taking Plato and Aristotle and putting them together. Again, it's a philosophy, but it's also a religion. It's a religion about the one. Very similar but different from Stoicism. And you have also coming out of Persia, the cult of Mithra. Mithra being one of the deities of Iran, which is also a universal cult. You had coming out of Egypt, forgive me, I have to say this, don't laugh, the cult of ISIS. We're not talking about Daesh. We're not talking about these idiots, these barbarians, these beasts. You know, this is a horrible challenge that we're faced with in the world today. Extremism. And it's not just the Muslims, unfortunately. It's in all religious communities you have this extremism. It's also a function of globalism out of control, monoculture out of control. But you have the cult of Isis, which was the cult of the goddess Isis of Egypt, who you can't even talk about now. You can't even, they misunderstand what you're saying. But that was also a universal cult. And Christianity, of course, will come into this picture. And in the end, Christianity will win. And that's because, and Rome will persecute Christianity severely for 300 years. A persecution that is one of the most severe that any religious community ever underwent. But in the end, ironically, the Roman emperor will accept Christianity. And Rome will become Byzantium. It will become a Christian empire. And they clearly understood that they've got to have something that works. They've got to have something that works, something that makes sense to the people. There are other stories that we could tell here. One of the most interesting of those is in Egypt itself, where the rulers of Egypt, the post-Alexandrian rulers of Egypt, the Ptolemies and the Cleopatras. Every king was called Ptolemy, and every queen was called Cleopatra. The Cleopatra that you're probably thinking of, who wasn't as beautiful as you might think. But she was an amazing woman. That she was. She was beautiful, yes. But she was also extremely intelligent, extremely gifted, and extremely dominant as well. But they will create a whole new religion for Egypt, which we won't talk about. We don't have time. I'm out of time. But what was the purpose of that religion? It was to try to see if there was some way to take the Egyptian population as a whole, which came out of Pharaonic religion, and to unite them with their Greek Macedonian conquerors, who were the likes of Cleopatra. She was a Macedonian. She was also an Egyptian, but she was a Macedonian who spoke perfect Greek. She spoke Coptic as well. So this is very interesting. And here we have to end. So in the world today, this is what Toynbee is saying. He's saying the West, with its powerful economic system, threw out its nets into the oceans and caught all the fish in the sea. Caught all the fish in the sea, meaning, so it means it caught all the religions, all the civilizations, all the people. And then Toynbee says that it would be very foolish for Westerners to think that they won. Because he said, now there will be a competition between all of these different religions and civilizations to see which of them, or which modification of them, or which adaptation of them can claim humanity, or most of humanity. He said, this is what's going to happen. And here, he said, the West may find that there are other religions that may be better suited for this than their own, which they have basically turned away from anyway. The West was already talking about the post-Christian age as a result of secularism. So humanity needs to have a religion or religions that speak to it intelligently, reasonably, and with meaning in this age we live in. And it has been noted that in the world today, the second most popular thing on the internet is religion. That's the second most popular thing of all. And a new religious movement is born every 12 hours. Usually this will give me an identity that I am right and everyone is wrong. I am something because I'm not you. Identity religion is very problematic. Extremism and terrorism is identity religion. It is not that universal religion that went by the name of Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism or Christianity or Islam or any other name. It's an identity religion. It's a cult that comes out of that. But you have a new religious movement born every 12 hours. 2 every day. What that Toynbee did believe that Islam had everything needed to make sense to people today. Because it is universal, it should be free of racism and nationalism and other things. We're not always, we know that. We often fail drastically, and it has many other aspects as well. Although Toynbee said the problem will not be in Islam itself, the problem is in the Muslims, because they don't get it, and because they have low self-esteem, And they also are extremely complacent people today. It's as if they're just getting by. And you have many of them who are leaving the faith, and you have others who are fanatically embracing the faith, and wherever you find fanaticism, you will find hypocrisy. Wherever you find fanatic rigidity, you will find hypocrisy. That's where it lurks. Fanaticism always is a veneer that covers over shallow belief. Shallow belief intensely believed, but it came most of you. That was before most of you were born. And I do believe that we have new generations of human beings today in our community and in others, who are capable of thinking in a new way and looking for new alternatives. Again, I want to say that what I believe is necessary in many ways. It's very good in many ways. Our technology has enabled us to sit here together. I can not even raise my voice, and you can hear me at the back of the room. Okay, that's technology. I came here in an airplane. That's technology. I have an iPhone in my pocket, which I hope doesn't ring. Okay? I didn't turn it off. I always forget. But the technology is very important, but who's in control? We or the technology? Technology obeys the law of efficiency, not even profit. Technology obeys the law of efficiency, and it rarely asks, is this good or bad? And usually most great technological undertakings today, as I'm sure many of you know by practical experience, many great technological projects today involve thousands of people. And no one who is doing that project knows the whole picture. One of the worst examples of that is the Manhattan Project that produced the atom bomb, one of the horrors of the 20th century. And those men and women who worked on the Manhattan Project, the vast majority of them did not know what they were doing. Those who knew that we are making a weapon, that the likes of which no one had ever seen before, they were only a very few. You could probably count them on the fingers of one hand. You might not even need 5 fingers. So this is one of the problems also with technology, that it becomes more and more impersonal. So could we control it? And many very wise voices like Jacques Ellul, whom I'm influenced by, and whom I would like to see a study. Jacques Ellul, Jacques, Jacques, Jacques Ellul, E-L-L-U-L, Ellul. He was a great French thinker. And he has many books, but the books that have influenced me the most are Technology. No, it's called The Technological Society. It's called The Technological Society, and the other one's called Propaganda. These are very thought-provoking books, which our academics and intellectuals and thinkers, I think, should read, and we need to discuss. Do we agree? Do we not agree? What are we going to do with that? But some people, I hope Sidi Abdul Hakim Winter, whom I admire beyond words. I've known him since 1985, and I admire him immensely. Extremely intelligent, extremely sincere human being. And we're honored to have him with us here right now in Kuala Lumpur. But I hope he would agree with this too, that today the religions have to stand together. We need to cohere. And again, in our own Islamic tradition, we were able to do something quite similar to that. We ought to be able to orchestrate that again, especially with these other wonderful people in interfaith, who are interested in the same thing. And again, I would say also that we have to do it in such a way that we bring in those people who don't come to interfaith from all of our religious communities, because often the interfaith people are the ones that you'll never have a problem with them. They're such nice people. They're never going to be a problem with you. They're very understanding. They're very compassionate. They're very empathetic. but what about the others who are not? We want to also be able to engage them. And I think if we take religion seriously, and their religion seriously, and you do your religion, we're not going to try to convert you, but let's work together. Let's live together. Let's be a family. One of the great scholars that I know, that I've had the honor to know in my life, and he's still alive, he said to say that the Prophet ﷺ, and you may be shocked to hear this, and forgive me for saying it, but he said to say that he created an Islamic state or governance in Medina is simply not true. Because from the very beginning, the Constitution of Medina recognized religious plurality. The Jews were an ummah with us, and so were all others. And there were others there who were not Muslim yet. So the state embraced all of them in a framework which Sheikh Abd-Allah bin Bayya has talked about very eloquently in the Marrakesh Declaration of last year. So we can live with others, and we must live with others. And we need spirituality in this age. And to me, it's in our interest that Christians find their roots, that they find their metaphysical roots as well. And then we've got something, and others, and we've got something really to talk about. And we've got a lot of work to do. And we need to be able to, be lights to humanity. We say in our tradition, Imam al-Ghazali says this, that the scholars, men and women, by the way, we have to emphasize that, as the Honorable Datuk has said. We have to emphasize that. There must be women scholars. This is a societal obligation in Islam. You cannot have just male scholars. That's not right. You've got a woman. You should have a woman or women at every level of scholarship, just as you have men. There's got to be a female voice. Here in Nusantara, you have a tradition of powerful women that I doubt anyone can compete with you in. You have great women, queens, saints who were queens. We have visited some of these. And you have women here that were like Queen Elizabeth in the days of Queen Elizabeth. This is a great tradition. And, we have to honor that. We have to bring, and some males would say that wouldn't be good to do. This will give prominence to women that's undue. No, I'm sorry, that's not the voice of Islam speaking. We're not like that. We've got to have women on a competence and a par with men. Where are you going to get your children? If you don't have educated women, you don't have women who understand this life, you don't have women who are involved, what are your children going to be like? And if you look at the most dysfunctional societies in the Muslim world today, look at the status of women in those societies. And time again, you'll see that the women there you have strong elements who don't want them to even learn how to read and write. And they want them to be ignorant. And they may kill you if you try to establish a school. These are, of course, sects. These are sectarian divisions. But this is a disaster. So we need to bring this to life, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, but we would say in our tradition, the true scholar, the true religious scholar, let's say man and woman, these are the lights of the time. They are, the lights of the time. Each of them is the radiant lamp of their age. And we can say that about all great religious scholars. I'm thinking right now of Gandhi, and some people would maybe not agree, but Gandhi says some beautiful things. I mean, didn't he say, "You be the change you want to see"? And Gandhi has this quotation that I love. And they asked him once, they said, "What do you think about Western civilization?" And he said, "I think it would be a good idea." That's really, that if only we could speak like that. That's so powerful. And, but, the scholars are the lights of the age. And we need to have this back today. And also, we say in our tradition, if it were not for the religious scholars, the people would become animals. They will become animals. So it is the scholarship, especially rooted in our traditions, especially in our religious traditions. This gives us back humanity. And here you'll see that we have a lot in common. And let me end here. I'm so sorry. I took way more time than I was supposed to. And inshallah, we'll open up the floor for questions. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Dr. Umar, for the enlightening and soothing talk on why religion matters. Alhamdulillah, now with the permission of Dr. Umar, ladies and gentlemen, we will now open the floor for the Q&A session. Okay. Just let me announce that we have around 1 hour allocated for the Q&A. Therefore, we appreciate if you could focus on questions related to the topic today and try to keep the questions brief, direct, concise, so to allow as many questions as possible. And, oh, you already, yes, Shafiq, could you please assist me? Oh, yeah. If you want me to read out your questions, if you're shy to go on our camera, you may write it down and pass it to Mr. Shafiq. Our usherers will go around and pick it up from you, pass to them, and inshallah they will filter and hand it to Dr. Umar. Dr. Umar, may I?
Well, I would actually prefer if you would do that hard work. And then you can ask me a short question or whatever. You know, if you would filter the questions and answer them shortly, I would appreciate that very much. Is that possible? Is that possible?
No.
No? Okay. Okay.
Inshallah, I think Shafiq will help us. So we will, I thought we were going to start with ladies first, but since kita terlambat kat dinner, so we're going to let the men start. Please, Bismillah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Faruq, thanks for your wonderful speech. I think you did raise a very fundamental principles here that we should recognize the differences of other religion and vice versa. But I think the problems are more subtle because nowadays there is a growing trend, especially among Muslims in the West and in Muslim countries, that they believe in the transcendental unity of religion. In a sense, they believe that...
Could you say that one more time? They believe in?
They believe in the transcendental unity of religion. Oh. In a sense that at the level of esoteric, we are different. We have a different forms of practices. But at the level of esoteric, they can arrive at the same truth and common God. So I appreciate if you could enlighten us what is the position of Islam on this. Thank you.
I believe that what you're talking about is perennialism. Is that correct?
Yes, right.
I'm not sure that perennialists all agree on the same thing. When you read them, you'll see that they talk in different ways. The idea that you just mentioned, the belief that that as Muslims we believe that every religion is a vehicle of salvation, that is not traditional Islamic belief. And it's also not necessary because of the fact that we tolerate religions as they are, whether they have access to perennial truth or they don't. And if we look in religious traditions, if you look at Buddhist traditions or Hindu traditions or Christian traditions or Muslim traditions, you have many different varieties within them. Some of them may be metaphysically profound. Others of them may not be metaphysically profound. But the fact that there are perennial truths in all traditions of human beings, that's a different matter. And when we study religions, it's very good to look for that. Again, if we look at Wan Daiju and Liu Ji of China, and we look at the Chinese Islamic tradition in general, from the very earliest time, the Chinese Muslims would say that when Islam came to China, in them, and you know, the role of China in Islam is extremely important. In Nusantara also, it's extremely important. I know that you know that, but I think it maybe needs to be emphasized even more than it is. But they said that when Islam came to China, that much of the truth that had been embodied in the Yellow Emperor, who is this legendary figure that goes back thousands of years, it was still alive. Even Confucius himself and the Taoist masters, Lao Tzu, you know, they also say that what they are teaching is just a portion of that truth that had been there before. Confucius is trying to save as much of a tradition that was lost as he can, and Lao Tzu in Taoism is also trying to do the same thing. Yes, sir. Let's have this man speak. No, he's in line. If you want to speak at the microphone, please go to the end of the line.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Sidi Umar. Rather recently, there was a research done by a group of researchers at the University of Missouri and Leeds Beckett University that proposes the thesis that the more religious a society is, the lower the performance in the natural sciences becomes. And to some commentators, this seems to vindicate the new atheist attitude towards religion. What are your thoughts on that? And very quickly.
And you said that this is being studied at the University of
Missouri? It has been recently published, yeah.
From the University of Missouri?
Missouri and Leeds Beckett University.
Okay.
Yeah. And very quickly, with regards to the status of women, am I to understand then that you strongly disagree with the Deobandi position of women with regards to their movements as to whether they should be allowed to work beyond the home or not?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First of all, the idea that highly religious societies do not produce science is historically invalid. And it is true that Western materialist science, reductionist science, developed hand in hand with the growth of secularism. And this is a very important topic to study. This would be part of Occidentalism. And we do not deny in any way the great technological achievements of modern science. We would be fools to do that. At the same time, we must be aware, as many Westerners are aware, of the fundamental flaws of modern scientific reasoning. Okay, this is a very important issue today, and the best writers on this that I know of are mostly Westerners. You can take, for example, Wolfgang Smith and the quantum enigma and science and myth, and then you could just begin to branch out from there. So metaphysically and philosophically, modern science is extremely weak and shallow. And this is something that needs to be discussed very carefully. Now, if we go back to earlier civilizations, many of them produce science. We Muslims pride ourselves on that, but we're not the only ones. And in those traditional sciences, and also in Europe before the modern age, don't think that Europe was the Dark Ages. This is part of the myth of secularism, as it looks back on a past of religiosity that it divorced itself from. One of the greatest things I remember studying in college at the University of Missouri was the greatness of the Middle Ages. And in fact, one of my best professors was a professor of Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales. We read everything Chaucer wrote. But this professor was showing us throughout Chaucer the metaphysical richness of Chaucer's worldview, to the extent that some people would even ask, who is a greater figure, Shakespeare, Milton, or Chaucer, or anyone else? Because Chaucer has a rich metaphysics, which some would say is even richer than the people who come after him. So we have to be very careful about denigrating the past. And modernism, as it develops, always does that. That what is past is backward. What is past is passé. It's finished. It's outdated. You know, it is reactionary. And what is good is forward-looking. It is futuristic. We're always on the move. We're never even in the present movement. We're always advancing. We're always becoming. So the critique of modern science is absolutely necessary. And it's got to be a sound philosophical critique. Quantum theory, Big Bang theory, and other things, they present us with major metaphysical problems. Big Bang theory is not watertight, brothers and sisters. It has never been watertight. Big Bang theory, which is the main way that we view the closed system universe today. You know, there's not enough matter there for it to work. It's missing over 90% of the matter necessary. No problem. We'll create dark matter. Where did you ever see it? You didn't see it. These are all saving the hypothesis. One of the greatest fallacies, one of the greatest fallacies, it's very important for us to study fallacy, is saving the hypothesis. Saving the hypothesis. Okay, this is saving the hypothesis. And in Islamic civilization, our science was great. And we take from all the ancient people and our neighbors as well. We took mathematics, you know, from the Hindus. We took mathematics from the Persians. We took mathematics from the Greeks. We worked on it for 500 years until we rooted it and we got this miracle of modern mathematics based on zero, which we took from the Hindus. But we work on the zero and other things. So these were collaborations, and they were brilliant collaborations. However, our science was religious. Even chemistry. You can read one of the great books of Islamic science, Kitab al-Sab'in, the book of the 70. And this is by Jabir ibn Hayyan, who's one of the earliest scientists in Islamic history. And he begins his book on chemistry with incredible praise of God. And then, the next thing he talks about is purification of the soul at great length. And then essentially, when he begins chemistry, he begins to say that, but if you did not partake in this praise of God, and if you don't understand the necessity for you to purify yourself, why would you ever study chemistry? Today, we can't understand that worldview. That's a different worldview. And it's a worldview in which you study the world out there to know the secrets of yourself. And this was typical of traditional people in China, in India, I'm sure in Java. I don't know enough about Java to say, but I'm sure it was true there. And, you know, so we've got to be able to establish the truth. We have got to be part of this discourse. And the second part, I don't like to call names. It's not wise to do that. I don't want people to call me names. I remember when I went back to the United States in the year 2000, one of my great teachers, who's Sheikh Dr. Khaldun al-Ahtab, the greatest muhaddith on earth that I know, and a great scholar of traditional science, he said, please, don't let yourself be labeled as this group or that group or this group or that group. And he said, you will be labeled. They're going to try to put a label on you. But he said, try not to be labeled. And I don't like to be called by a label. And I don't like to call other people by labels either. And if you look at any of the groups, the one that was mentioned, or any of the groups, you'll find great diversity among them. Don't think they're all the same. Don't think that they all take the same position. You know, that's not true. And, you know, in this time, we've got to bring people together. And we've got enough division as it is. And we have to find platforms where we can speak together. But the position of women, to me, is not negotiable. Not negotiable. This is Islamic law. Women, it is a societal obligation that they be scholars. And I've been told by scholars of that very same school that was mentioned, that the woman doesn't have to cook, she doesn't have to clean her house, she doesn't have to do housework. None of that is required of her in Islamic law. From scholars of this very school. They, that is Islamic law, by the way. And, when a woman is a good housewife, as most of our women are, and I would be nothing without, a wife who is willing to do what I've failed to do. But it's my obligation even to get her a maid. She doesn't have to do that. And her money is hers. She doesn't have to use her money to support the family or anything like that. So Islamic law actually gives women tremendous power. And this is why in our history, if you look at the history of the great benefactors, most of them are benefactresses. They are women who were extremely wealthy, more wealthy than men. And why? Because the men have to support the family. The men have to pay the rent. The men have to pay the electricity. No, they didn't have electricity. But they have to do that. So, we have to restore, and we have many great Muslim scholars who've written about this. And they say that a society in which women are not properly cultivated and empowered is like a human being who's functioning with only one good lung. You can't win the marathon like that. Or one good kidney. You need to have two. You can live with one, but you're not going to be as healthy as you were before. So God enabled us to be open-minded and broad-minded. And, culture is a really important part of Islam. Al-'ada muhakkama. This is one of the fundamental principles of Islamic law by consensus, that good cultural convention has the power of law. It has the power of law. So wherever we go, Nusantara, you have a rich civilization here. And I want to emphasize that. Your civilization here, may we be able to study it. May we be able to understand it. Because often the records that we use in writing and in archaeology, they're really not enough. There are other ways we have to approach it, in my belief. And our wonderful beloved Sidi Abdul Hakim Winter, last night, he was talking about the greatness of Nusantara civilization from ancient times. Because this is the superhighway of the world. You were always the superhighway of the world. The Silk Road that goes from the west to China is another superhighway. Which one is greater, the Silk Road or the sea route that goes through Nusantara? Nusantara, 10 times greater, because it's much easier to go by sea than by land. And it's actually safer to go by sea than by land. And you can take more. You can load the ships down, with hundreds of times more than you can put on a camel's back. So these things have to be studied, and we need to bring these traditions to life, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Please.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I will just, forgive me, Dr. Umar, I'll just paint a quick context before I ask the question. As Allah willed, I used to manage an Islamic think tank for several years, during which, among other things, I was involved in several inter-religious dialogues, events, seminars, conferences, both open and some closed-door roundtables. I was invited then to moderate some of these deliberations, and I was also invited to speak on certain topics. I was in my late 40s. Wait, hang on, I'm in my mid-40s. I was in my late 30s. And of late, however, I have been shying away from these events because I'm currently more and more involved in organizing more traditional type of da'wah events, majlis dhikr or majlis ilm, knowledge seeking and remembrance of Allah. Actually, I organize events mainly of Ustadha Halima Ali Drus. She's from Indonesia, and she's really, mashallah, a giant. I hope that that many do appreciate her, but she doesn't speak in English. She speaks in Arabic and Indonesian. But I have been shying away from these invitations because, partly because I feel I have been chastised. Sometimes they would say you're actually lending support to attempts from non-Muslims to put all the religions on the same stage. So like the Buddhist organizations, the Hindu, Mother Mangalam, I'm familiar with 3-4 of them, the Calvary Church. They've asked, where have you been, where have you gone? But I've been told, you should not be attending these sessions because you're just giving them support. They're trying to equate all of us, that we're all separate paths to the same creator. So I don't know what you feel about this. I mean, after listening to you, this question's been burning in my heart for a few years, has come up. And I'm not sure whether, if I had so much time, whether I should commit my da'wah to, the more traditional, classical, what have you, than trying to do sort of inter-religious debates where it could be politicized or sensationalized. I'm not sure. And the second question that I have is, when you said that historically Muslims, wherever they went, they used to enrich other religious communities. It's very interesting, but at the same time, you also commented that we don't want to convert them; we want to accept them.
Well, is your question over?
Okay, so my question is, when do we start converting them, or we don't convert them, like forever? I mean, I'm not sure. Do we just sit and say hello and have coffee and respect and honor each other? So these are two separate questions. One is more personal, to do with my own development. Thank you so much, Dr. Umar.
Thank you so much. There are different ways to work in interfaith. Thank you for coming. Thank you. There are different ways to work in interfaith. We have a person in the United States named Ivo Patel, and you could easily find him on the internet. His approach to interfaith has been, I think, quite sound, and like there's not going to be any wishy-washy. We're all the same thing. We're all on the same page when it comes to theology. Okay? And I call that wishy-washy. And many people who even believe in the underlying truths of religions, they believe that to be wishy-washy too. They don't go for that. But he says, let's come together as different religious communities that respect each other. And, if we want to talk about what we believe, then let's talk about it honestly. I had a conference in Chicago, now it's probably maybe more than 7 years ago, or 10 years ago actually, more than 10 years ago, which was about the children of Israel, Jesus and Mary, in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And my desire there, and I had very good friends of mine who were Christians and Jews there. But it's like, let's talk about this honestly. That I don't believe in crucifixion, and you do. If you're most Christians today, almost all Christians today, they believe in crucifixion. So, we don't believe in crucifixion. And that's, of course, an affront to Christians, because that goes right to the root of their religion. And so can we talk about this objectively? And can I, for example, talk about early Christian history, when in fact the crucifixion was the first thing Christians disagreed on in the 1st and 2nd centuries? That there were Christians who did not believe in the crucifixion from the very beginning. And they were a large number of the Christians of the 1st and 2nd century. So am I allowed to make that statement here in public? And are you, as a Christian, going to be offended by it? And will this be a challenge such that we can never be friends again? Because it shouldn't be that way. And we have to understand that our fundamental religious differences are such that they will not be solved in this world. And this is one of the reasons also why historically we never forced anyone to become a Muslim. We didn't force Jews or Christians or anyone else. And, we have a whole theology about that. That you will not be able to convince them to all be Muslims. That's not going to be possible to do that. That's the structure of reality. This is why toleration, to me, is something that we need to take some leads on. Because can you tolerate me if I don't agree? Or is the price of toleration that we not talk about, where we do fundamentally disagree? Because that's really weak. That's not stable. If we're going to be friends, we're going to be friends on the basis of understanding our differences. In the RIS convention in Canada this year, in Toronto, and we had the great honor to have the RIS here for the first time. I was happy with it. I hope you're happy with it. I hope we can do it every year. I would be happy to be back here every year for that and for other things. I can't do it. But we had some Orthodox rabbis speaking there. We had a number. We had Christians as well. But one of the Orthodox rabbis whom I really took a liking to, he was so humble. But he said that, and when he spoke to the whole convention, he said that I am a Jew. We have a distinctive religion. It's true, we share vocabulary. We have so much in common. But he's right. You have a distinctive religion. And he said, I'm not going to say that we're the same, because we're not. But I do believe that we should stand together on issues of justice and fighting oppression. And I really believe he was honest about that. And I took a great liking to him. He's Orthodox, and in fact, for the first time I asked him, why do you always wear black? Because I see the Orthodox Jews in my country always wearing black, and I want to know, why do you always wear black? But I don't want to be impolite. I don't want to walk up in the airport and say, I guess you're Orthodox Jew, why do you always wear black? But he said, we do it to break the ego. We do it out of humility. And I said, that I can really relate to that. I'm glad I asked you. So respect for other people where they are. Is that possible? And for us as Muslims, that was not only possible, it was theologically necessary. Okay, that we had this, our position regarding other religious communities with whom we disagree is based on theological principles. And legally, it's sometimes astounding. I mean, we have the case in traditional Islamic history, where a very touchy issue was brought to the Muslim judge. And this was about the Magians of Iran. And it was about the fact, akramakumullah, the fact that offended Christians, Jews, and Muslims, that they were practicing incest, that they were allowing incestuous marriages between family members. And so the protest was not just from Muslims. It's like, should this be allowed? And what did the judge say? It's a well-known classical case. And he said that, does their religion allow this? And then they said, yes, it does. And then he said, we made a covenant with them that we would accept them and their community as they are, so we will not intervene. That is a pretty astounding position to take. But that is traditional Islamic law. Leave them alone. That's not your business. So also, is Islam a religion of conversion? Yes. So is Christianity. So is Buddhism. And so was Zoroastrianism and Magianism as well. And, but the art of bringing people to the faith is an art. And it shows kindness. It shows empathy. It shows understanding. It means building bridges. And the Wali Songo of Java are one of the eternal examples of that at its best. They show great respect And they didn't convert all of Java, in 2 or 3 generations. Usually conversion, wherever it happens, if it's not done by force. And Muslims did not convert by force. It usually takes many generations. Some would say 10 generations. Persia was the land in which Islam spread with the greatest facility. But Islam didn't become the majority religion until about 250 years after its introduction. In Spain and Portugal, Islam will become also the majority in about 2/3 of Iberia, the Great Peninsula. That also took over 300 years. When the Crusaders came to the Middle East, around 1096, the vast majority of Lebanon was still Christian. The Crusaders didn't treat them much better. The Crusaders were equal opportunity employers. That if you were not with them, whether you were a Jew, Christian, or Muslim, you're not going to be treated very well. They were quite brutal, and the Christian Church knows that. The Christian Church even admits that. The popes have even said, that we ask God's forgiveness for this. So we've got to, we've got to learn to talk about our religions intelligently. And I am a person who loves da'wah. I believe in my religion, but I don't want to dishonor other traditions either. And I don't want to belittle them either. And I have never liked Muslim missionaries who were offensive to other people. And some of them are that way. Sometimes you can say, well, they got it from the missionaries, because sometimes the Christian missionaries, when they did their work, especially in the 19th century and the early 20th century, did it in a way that was very offensive. And so some of our quote-unquote missionaries thought, well, we'll do the same thing. But that's not proper. There should be respect. There should be empathy. There should be care. And there should be caution. And, also, like, are you going to convert people and take care of them? Because, like right now, I know parts of the Muslim world. I can mention, for example, in West Africa, I go to the Gambia a lot, beautiful little country. And next to the Gambia, you have Guinea-Bissau, which was a Portuguese colony. And there's a tribe there called Balanta. They would be very happy if they knew I mentioned them. They are extremely courageous people. They don't know fear. They were idolaters. They would not embrace Christianity or Islam. That began to change in recent decades. But they were impervious. And woe be to the missionary who tried to convert them to Christianity, and woe be to the Muslim who dared to do that too. But now we have 15,000 Balanta converts to Islam. 15,000 in the last few years. You also have Christian converts among Balanta now as well. But what do we do with them? And this, to me, that's the question. Don't talk to me about conversion if you're not going to tell me how you're going to take care of them. Because you have to do that. And in the case of the Balanta, these are people, they're the strongest tribe in that region. But what if, after embracing Islam, they were to take their teaching from ISIS or from Boko Haram in Nigeria? These are extremist organizations that are deadly. What if they were to take it from those groups? Would that be good news? And, so we've got to, Muslims have got to be very careful. Do not be triumphalists. That we have to take care of our own community. We have to learn to, we have to have therapy. We have to have marriage counseling. We've got to have all kinds of other things. So let's be honest about ourselves. And they say in the history of the United States that they always said, let the best religion win. It doesn't really work like that. They usually try to rig the game. But, you know, we as Muslims should be interested in the well-being of all religious communities, and even secularists who are not Muslims, not religious. We should also embrace them with compassion and empathy. And you have to understand that when people today don't believe, as many people today don't, they've got reasons for that. Most people who don't believe in God, they don't believe in God for theological reasons or philosophical. They may claim they do, but that's a weak argument. That's not strong. Despite Dawkins and despite Hawking, their arguments are very weak arguments. They have no philosophical substance whatsoever. But most people who disbelieve because of what? Believers. Right? That we, people who call ourselves believers, among the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Confucianists, the Taoists, and others, we often do outrageous things. And often we are very hypocritical. And, you know, so we have to get our own houses together, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and, you know, may we have humanity. May our scholarship that we have bring us humanity. Yes. Would you like to ask a question after I've gone on and on? Yeah,
sure.
I've gone and on and on, taken all the time.
We take this for the last verbal, and then I will continue with the written questions.
Okay.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Doctor.
Wa
Thank you for your enlightening speech just now about religion being a fundamental core in a society, and the other things that I've learned from you, such as the status of women in a society, like they have to be elevated, especially in the modern era. And for the reason I'm standing here today, I'm going to focus on women specifically. Because like you said just now, about there's a rise in the 20th and the 21st century of secular movements or agendas. The movement that I want to focus on that has caught my attention in the past few months is about feminism. Well, what I understand about feminism is that they want to obviously liberate the oppressed women in some parts of the world. And there's no denying that some of their agendas are, I agree, well, humane and civilized, like the right for women to get education. But there are also some things that I do not agree with about feminism. Well, in this case, radical feminism, like the rights for women in some parts of the world to be topless.
To be what?
Topless. To walk around topless without clothes, pardon me.
Okay.
Okay. And also,
I could shock you. I'm going to probably shock you.
majority of feminists, they, as far as I know, they support other rights such as LGBT rights, which is obviously not. Islam does not agree with it. So I would like to hear your thoughts about feminism nowadays, how we should deal with it, how is it permissible in Islam, and if so, to what extent, and yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I'll try to answer it briefly. Feminism and womanism, these things actually need extensive discussion. However, feminism grows up in the West because of the West, without any view to any other women. And Occidentalism is very important for us. Were Western women always free Were Western women always able to do just what they wanted to do? And probably most of you know that that wasn't the case. Women were not allowed to vote in Western democracies until very recently, in France, in Switzerland, in other countries. Women were not allowed to inherit. Sometimes women were not allowed to have property. There were all sorts of disability that were inflicted on women in the West. And so feminism in the 19th century grows up in protest against that. And later on, when the feminists believe that they are getting ground, especially in the 1970s, 1980s, then feminists begin to also look at the world at large. A lot of them begin to look at the Muslim world, and in fact, Westerners were talking about Muslim women even before they had feminism. Many of the colonial powers who did not allow women freedom in their own societies were talking about how bad the situation of women is in Muslim societies. This was part of the colonial program. And it was also one of the levers that was used as an inroad into Muslim societies. This has been studied very well, and it's been studied by Muslims and non-Muslims, by women more than men, as a matter of fact. But a lot of Muslim women, even those Muslim women who might regard themselves to be feminists, they will say, please leave us alone. That, this is imperialist. If you want to impose your ideas of what is freedom on us, we have our own culture. We have our own past. We have our own way of doing things. And we'd like to rather do it ourselves. Feminism has many different expressions. You have American feminism. You have European feminism. European feminism in particular, especially as it's developed over the last decades, is very concerned with the failure of feminism in the West. That things really haven't changed. That the patriarchy, maybe that's not the right word anymore, the male prerogative is just as much there as it was before. There is a glass ceiling. It's very difficult for women to rise above. And a lot of the feminists in Europe today are talking about their rights to be mothers, their rights to be women, and that women and men are not the same, and that the woman can't be happy if she has to be a man, if she has to imitate men. So the discourse on feminism, is not so simple. And if you want to hear something shocking, traditional Muslim society, European feminism in particular, especially as it's developed over the last decade, is very concerned with the failure of feminism in the West, that the things really haven't changed. we have to, get back this understanding that we had in the past. And traditionally, Muslims were able to deal with all these different situations. In most of the societies, even in Nusantara, I don't know a great deal about your past, but probably the way a lot of the people dressed was not exactly the way we dress today, was it? And the da'i has got to be veiled from that, male or female. And he's got to talk about the main things. The main thing here is belief in God, belief in the oneness of God. And after that, we go step by step. And again, if you look at the haba'ib, these great sheikhs, from Bani Alawi, they in da'wah were brilliant. They were brilliant, step by step. I could tell you shocking stories, but I've already said enough shocking things. And let's take some questions. And forgive me if I shocked you too much.
Thank you. I would like to continue with the written questions. We have about 10 minutes, Shah, so probably we can just take one.
Okay.
Okay? This is as is written. I believe in one God and a spiritual person, but why do I need to belong to any religious group? I'm a humble person and I have issue with every religion who think they are the truth or the greatest. And if we don't believe what they believe, we won't make it to paradise. Imagine doing good all our life, but we won't make it just because we don't associate or attach ourselves to any religion. I think to think that everyone will enter hell just because we don't believe what you believe is a very arrogant religion like Islam and Christianity.
Well, religions require many things to work. And one of the things they require to work is continuity. All religions, whatever they are, they have to have continuity with the past. And this is very important. Modernism, in all of its many, many different forms, always involves the break in continuity. The past becomes essentially irrelevant. When you do that, something happens to the human being. I need to be rooted in the past. Again, my religion needs to tell me about reality. It needs to tell me about the orderly cosmos and the history of the cosmos. So continuity is a big thing in religion. And the other C, which is a big thing, is community. Community in
Everyone will enter hell just because we don't believe what we believe is a very arrogant religion like Islam and Christianity.
one of the things they require is continuity. All they can be comfortable with. And many of these communities are many of them are being hopeless. And that's not good. But we want to be communities that are not. And we, you know, God says in the Quran, you are the best community from He was sent as a mercy to all the world, meaning to all human beings, good and bad, all ethnic groups, believers and non-believers, all religious communities. He is a
Thank you, testing.
Biasa kalau buat Instititu dia ada double sound.
Ini ambil daripada apa? Website. Kalau ini yang itu putus.